You're about to listen to the Pro Wrestling Zone podcast, a Majestic production property. One of the quickest rising professional wrestling podcasts on the market today, and the most entertaining podcast in the history of existence. Please note, before diving into the show, that this is for entertainment purposes only, so myself and Peanut Gallery engage in exaggerations, dirty or offensive jokes, and satirical comments. If you are a triggered little snowflake who gets professionally offended, this is not the podcast for you. If you do enjoy our work, we ask that you contribute to our Patreon page at patreon.com/majesticp. Contributors get access to the Discord, vote on what topic we cover, and enjoy exclusive content such as pay-per-view watch parties. Here's a sample of that from NXT TakeOver Portland. What about the other company that Bobby Fish and Kyle O'Reilly went from?
Oh, ROH?
The one that they were signed exclusively to.
Oh, Ring of Honor?
Oh, that's going to be a lot of fun. Oh my God. I felt that in my hand. If this is something you believe you would enjoy, visit our Patreon at patreon.com/majesticp and become a patron. This ensures that we continue to entertain you for years to come. Without further ado, sit back and enjoy the show. And we are back with our original topic. We're covering probably one of the most infamous tournaments in all of professional wrestling history, the Brawl for All, and the Dark Side of the Ring episode that covered the Brawl for All.
Right.
The Brawl for All was the first shoot boxing tournament on wrestling television.
So for those of us who are total noobs, what is shoot?
So a shoot fight is basically when it becomes real. They really beat each other up. There's no predetermined anything, and this could rise from a multitude of reasons.
Right.
With this situation, it was just a boxing match.
Right.
But there are a lot of instances where wrestlers get really pissed off at each other. They intentionally punch each other in the face, and a full-blown fight breaks out. That's kind of what a shoot is.
But this was purposeful. So who are the main characters that came up with this Brawl for All? Because I think this was my most interesting takeaway from it, was the feud between Jim Cornette and Vince Russo.
So Vince Russo was the guy who developed the Brawl for All. Based on Jerry Springer, which at the time was one of the hottest shows on television.
Right.
And he's like, we want to do something like this based on what the era was. This was grunge. Very real, very gritty. That was cool.
Right.
So Vince Russo's idea was to kind of get, that these people are actually tough in the ring.
Right, and who said that? And I think it was JBL, or at the time it was...
JBL said that
Or at the time it was Bradshaw.
It was Bradshaw. JBL said that he could beat anybody, and Russo has come out multiple times stating that he never liked JBL. Kind of a cocky prick.
Right.
I think even JBL says now that he was a cocky prick back in the day.
Yeah. Well, you're young and dumb, so...
JBL and Bully is like a catch-22. It's
right.
like two peas in a pod. So Russo, I think there were like 16 people. They had some legitimate shoot fighters in there at the time. They had Dan Severn, who was UFC Super Fight champion and the NWA World Champion when he signed with WWE. He was a non-exclusive. I think he was like one of the first non-exclusive competitors, and that was huge.
Right.
I don't know why they did not push him. I mean, I would have launched that guy to the stratosphere.
But again, if he's put into again, there's a lot of stories to a lot of these different characters. I think the best way for us to go about it is we highlight some of the characters, but let's get back to the task at hand. We were talking about Vince Russo versus Jim Cornette.
Jim Cornette, a very traditional wrestling guy,
right?
Professional wrestling, been in it since 1977. Was a writer too, but Vince Russo, I believe, was head.
Right, and Jim Cornette did not like the Brawl for All idea. Thought it went against everything that wrestling stood for, and it was a catalyst to their feud that lasts to this day.
Yes, it was kind of like the spark that really drove it, and Jim Cornette has come out and stated that he's going to stay alive until Vince Russo dies, and he's going to go and piss on his grave.
Excellent.
There is that is sheer mortal hatred,
right?
And I don't think Vince Russo has that against Jim Cornette as much.
No,
as Cornette
has Jim Cornette has a lot of hatred towards Vince Russo. I mean, I didn't realize how bad it was until I saw that. I'm like, holy crap!
Right,
the kind of shit. So let's talk about some of the major characters in Brawl for All.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the MMA fighter that was in it.
So there was Dan Severn and Steve Blackman, who were both either Taekwondo or MMA guys.
Yes.
Steve Blackman.
But didn't one of them drop out and say, I don't want to do this?
Both of them did.
Okay.
Both Steve Blackman and Dan Severn pulled out. So they both won,
right?
But they both pulled out.
Okay.
They both basically claimed that they did not have anything to prove to anybody, and they kind of saw that they could get hurt or it could damage their reputation.
Because what's going on is you're putting guys who are not used to shoot fighting inside a situation of shoot fighting.
Yep.
So they're not trained for it, they're not prepared for it, and if you saw the Brawl for All, it was just bad. A
lot of guys got very, very hurt.
Yep.
So
who else? Did anyone else pull out besides those two?
I can't remember 100% off the top of my head.
Road Warrior Hawk got injured during his bout in the first round. So, of course, that meant that the guy who I think it was
Draws.
Yes,
and he was also on the episode of Dark Side of the Ring.
Yes. Obviously, if you know anything about him, this is quadriplegic, right? Yes,
he's a quadriplegic.
Yes, it had nothing to do with this, but they did talk a little bit about his injury that caused him to become a quadriplegic.
Darren Drozdov was a very successful football player, played for Denver Broncos, 49ers, so he was tough. Dr. Death Steve Williams was so basically what they wanted with this whole thing about the Brawl for All was whoever won this tournament got a program with Steve Austin. It clearly didn't happen. We'll talk about it when we get there. But they wanted Dr. Death Steve Williams to be that guy.
Right. So they were almost expecting Steve Williams to get up to that level.
Yeah, Steve Williams is a very accomplished amateur wrestler as well, and he was in Japan doing a lot of really brutal. This was at the time when they had the brutal shoot fight wrestling. Right. So he was successful there.
Right. And then I guess the only you got like Bob Holly, the Godfather. Mm-hmm. Those were in there. But let's talk about Bart Gunn, the eventual winner of the tournament. Yep. They had a lot about Bart Gunn going into this.
Yes, Bart Gunn was basically like a throwaway guy. He faced first Bob Holly, and they were a part of the New Midnight Express.
Right.
So a tag team
facing
each other, actually hurting each other.
Right.
And they even described they didn't have Bob Holly on there. I'm surprised they didn't actually get him on there. Bart Gunn said as soon as I beat him, we had to be in the car together, and we actually had a match together.
Right.
And it was just a very awkward situation.
Right. It was.
And then the next fight, he faced off against Steve Williams.
The interesting thing about Bart Gunn, though, was all of his matches after that first round were decided by knockout.
Yep.
So he knocked out Steve Williams, which was
that was a big one.
That was a big one.
Everyone thought that Steve Williams had it in the bag. Bart Gunn was like, okay,
yeah,
I will beat you.
Right.
And he did. He knocked out Steve Williams,
yep.
and that killed Steve Williams' momentum forever. They still wanted to do the Steve Williams program with Steve Austin, but Austin said no.
Right, because obviously Steve Williams just got knocked out by a guy who they
essentially a jobber. I'm sorry,
a jobber.
And
right.
Nothing against Bart Gunn, but he's a jobber.
Right.
Then he took on the Godfather.
Yep.
And the Godfather was, a bouncer.
Right.
Here in Vegas, and he runs a nightclub to this day, and he knocked him out as well.
Yep.
And the finals were Bart Gunn
and Bradshaw.
So the guy who basically inspired it went to the finals in Bradshaw against this guy who nobody thought he was going to get to this point.
Right.
And knocked he was out.
Oh, yeah, Bradshaw was out.
Smelling salts could not do anything. He flopped on the floor like a fish.
Oh, yeah.
And the Godfather even showed, huge bruises on his leg because his ACL and his MCL tore, and a lot of people got hurt.
Right.
I guarantee you this was concussion city as well.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, and Mark, just another, total off, and I totally forgot about this. Mark Marrow was a Golden Gloves boxer as well.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So, there were a lot of very legitimate people in this Brawl for All that where they were up against guys who don't know how to punch.
Right. Well, I mean, properly. They don't know how to. It was essentially what amounted to be a bar fight.
Yes, they were just basically bar fights.
Each and every single night that this happened, it was essentially a bar fight.
Yep. I remember watching raw footage of this, not live, because this was kind of when we first started to watch, and it was nobody liked it.
Right.
I'm sorry, you don't go to a professional wrestling match to see boxing.
You don't go to see a bar fight.
Right, and also this was lodged in Raw. A lot of these happened during Monday Night Raw.
Right.
And it's you get wrestling, and then you get 2 fights, and then you get Raw. It's okay, you can't do that.
Right.
So it was just a very awkward. It was super awkward. Bart Gunn did win.
Yep.
Though he won, and he got a WrestleMania fight against Butterbean, which essentially was a punishment for him winning the fucking Brawl.
Oh yeah. Butterbean, he was a good he was one of the best boxers in the world at the time.
Yep, huge money. That guy, he punched you They showed a huge fist. I'm good lord, look at the size of that cinder block.
So Bart Gunn did not get his program with Steve Austin. And instead, he got punished for winning what essentially was a series of bar fights.
Yeah, that's what this was. And it's you cannot determine winners because this is a fight.
Right.
You cannot fix the fight, especially in this situation.
Right.
Gunn was knocked out in 35 seconds. And he was fired afterwards. He was done. I'm what the fuck? What did he do? He just won. Why?
Right.
If WWE were going to be serious about this, and they really wanted to do this, have Bart Gunn actually have the program with Steve Austin. Just might as well. Fuck it. Let's see what happens.
Right.
What would be wrong with that?
Again, it wasn't in their big plans. They had see. Here's the thing: is that they had an idea. They were looking at it as if it was kayfabe. Mm-hmm. They had a certain guy that they wanted to win.
Yep.
And the problem is that if you have a shoot fight, it's very often the guy you least expect that's going to end up being on top.
Right.
But the aftermath of it was, obviously Bart Gunn, he just went into obscurity.
Yep. This was probably one of the worst ideas to get anybody over of all time.
Yep.
It ruined many of careers.
Yeah, let's take a look. Let's go down the list and see whose careers they ruined.
So Steve Blackman won, but he pulled out, but he was really never much of anything, which was disappointing. Mark Marrow generally is doing okay, like, for the most part.
Right.
He kind of lost in the second round, so it doesn't matter. Mark Canterbury, I don't know who that is.
Bradshaw, everyone knows who Bradshaw is, but his rise did not have anything to do with this.
No. Brackus, who was the bodybuilder, but he lost against Savio Vega, who, carved out a nice little career for him overall. He's working with MLW right now. And, people know who Savio Vega is.
Right.
A really good friend of Steve Austin, blah, blah, blah. Darren Drozdov, obviously he got powerbombed by D'Lo Brown and broke his back. He was a quadriplegic.
Right.
But I guess now he's getting more movements in his hands, but he's been paralyzed since, like, the early 90s.
Right.
Or not the early 90s, late 90s. Which kind of sucks because he was actually a decent little wrestler. Road Warrior Hawk.
Okay.
He was already a legend by this point, but, now he's dead.
Right.
Excuse me. Bart Gunn, we already talked about it extensively. Bob Holly, he was still in WWE for a very long time, became Hardcore Holly, kind of carved out a nice little career for him. Good. Quebecer Pierre, PCO.
Yes.
So this was PCO.
Yep.
He did lose. Steve Williams, Dr. Death, I think he died not too long ago after this for the most part, which is very disappointing. The Godfather. Nice career for him. He still works in Vegas. Maybe we'll go to his club. Dan Severn. Legend already. Everybody knows that Dan Severn was the guy who they really fucked over, and why did they not have Dan Severn versus Ken Shamrock? You had them in the same company.
Right.
Fuck. And also, I think at this point, Ken Shamrock was Intercontinental Champion.
Right.
Why don't we put the Intercontinental Champion on a UFC Champion, on the NWA World Champion, and just make him like a belt collector of all belt collectors? 8 Ball, no clue. And Scorpio, Too Cool Scorpio, had a successful career.
So what are the conclusions that we can gather from this?
This
was a bad idea.
It was a bad idea. This was a bad idea on paper.
Yes.
It was a bad idea in execution.
Yep.
And it was a catalyst for Jim Cornette to fuck off from WWE as well.
He never went back, did he?
No.
Okay.
Vince Russo, his career overall was, I think, for the most part, they saw the cracks of what. We saw the cracks.
Wasn't this one of the catalysts that got him to go to WCW or got him fired?
No, he was never fired. He quit.
Oh, he quit.
He quit over the phone because WCW offered him bigger money because at the time WCW was in shambles, but this was 1998, 1999. Vince Russo didn't go over there until 2000.
Right. Okay, so, that's what I thought.
This was kind of at the very height of it, and they just got offered more money.
Right. But yeah, I mean, it was just bad idea, but the show was good.
The Dark Side of the Ring was very good.
They had a lot of Bart Gunn in there. They had a lot of
and it was really cool seeing Bart Gunn.
A lot of the Godfather. They had Vince Russo. They had Jim Cornette, obviously not in the same room.
Right.
And
it was. I really liked this episode.
It was a good episode.
This was a nice little nostalgia for me, and obviously, we'll talk about the next episode coming up. Might as well do it now since Dark Side of the Ring, the Dark Side of the Ring part.
Right.
It is going to cover Jimmy Snuka and Nancy Argentino.
Okay.
And the overall discussion for our program after that, if they're going to do Rebellion in a closed set live, we're going to
cover Rebellion.
But if they don't, the topic is going to be, because this was essentially a cover-up.
Right.
Everyone knew in the 80s that he killed Nancy Argentino. Sorry, I hate to tell you.
Right.
We're going to talk about other cover-ups.
Yeah.
And when we come back, we're going to do a brief little history and an overall discussion about if, the shoot portion of wrestling, if it can work, if it can't, some of the history, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah.